Hello, Namaskar, Vanakkam. My name is Sudhir Sahasranaman and you're watching CBSE with Sudhir. We get started with the fourth chapter of your Class 8 Social Science textbook. This is on the colonial era in India. We have studied about the Delhi Sultanate, the Cholas, the Mughal Empire, the Sikhs, and the Marathas. Now we are getting into what happened when the Europeans first came into India. Of course, the more details we will be studying in class 9 and 10, but this is where it begins. And let me tell you, it is absolutely fascinating. More so if you read, I don't know whether at class 8 level you would want to read this kind of books, but two books I have read. One I have read full, one I have read about half of it. This one is by Shashi Tharoor. This talks essentially about how the British plundered India. Plundered means looted India. And it's a fascinating book. Lots of statistics, lots of very interesting details written by Shashi Tharoor. An even more interesting book, which I have not read fully, is by Manu Pillai, The Ivory Throne. Now, this talks about the time when Vasco da Gama actually stepped into India, landed in Calicut, which is now called Kozhikode, in the northern part of Kerala. Very fascinating stories. In fact, when he set out from Portugal, people thought that these people on this ship will not survive. So who accompanied this explorer called Vasco da Gama in 1498? The king of Portugal sent a lot of prisoners, and he thought that even if these guys die, it doesn't matter. They are all hardened criminals. So incidentally, in 1498, when the first Europeans landed on Indian shore, they were a group of hardened criminals from the jails of Portugal. I found this aspect very fascinating. It is mentioned in this book by Manu Pillai. Now, this particular quote, look at this quote written by William Digby, who was an author, who was a journalist, right? Now, he says that nearly 2 centuries ago, that is 200 years ago, the early Britishers who came, in Bengal and the other presidencies in India, most of them came either from, basically from Surat in Gujarat, right? They thought that, we can loot this particular land. But later on, the Britishers, when they started ruling, when they started administering India, the loot became even more. You would take all the raw material from here and send it to England and make them into finished goods for, it was the raw material was for their factories in England. And from there, all that material would be sent back to India, and the Indians would be asked to buy it at exorbitant, at very high rates. So that's how the wealth was looted from India. India, before it became a colony, was one of the richest countries in the world. By the time the British left India in 1947, India had been reduced to an extremely poor, underdeveloped country. And now we are done much better in the last 75 years since independence, more than 75 years since independence. Okay. Now, what we need to know, modern England has been made great by Indian wealth. Modern England has been made great by Indian wealth. Wealth always taken by the might and the skill of the stronger. Now, these are very strong words said by this gentleman who is a Britisher, right? That the modern England has actually been built by Indian wealth. And it's a very strong statement. So let me just tell you. So William Digby was an author. He was a journalist, and he was very critical of the British government on many issues, especially the plunder of wealth. So if you see this illustration, this represents the Queen of England at that time. And then you see in the middle tier, all the Britishers, and bottom, you see the impoverished Indians who are being looted in order to create the wealth for the English country, right? So that's what this kind of conveys. Now this particular painting, which is called The East Offering Its Riches to Britannia. Britannia is another word for England. So you see all the riches are being offered to England by India forcibly. They were forced to give it up. Now, this timeline that you see spread across 2 pages, I want you to see it very carefully. What I mentioned just now a little while back about Vasco da Gama, Vasco da Gama, this date is important. 1498 is when Vasco da Gama landed in Calicut, which is now called Kozhikode. Let me show you an illustration which I have made so that it becomes easier for you to know. So this is how Vasco da Gama landed in Calicut, which is now called Kozhikode, in 1498. And that is what began the European colonization of India. In the last chapter on Marathas, I told you about how 5 main countries. See, because what happened was all these small countries in Europe, they were looking to create colonies so that they would become richer, and it became a prestige symbol. England was one of the leaders in this. France, Denmark, Holland, and a bit of Italy, but which is the fifth one? Portugal, of course, Portugal. So this is how you see Vasco da Gama coming in these big ships to Calicut and meeting the locals out there, right? So 1498 is an important date, and we will study about all these important dates. This is another very important date, 1608. You would now wonder, okay, sir, Portugal, the first they came in 1498. When did the British come to India? I'm sure you are curious. You should be curious. 1608 is when the Britishers, of course, there is a date of someone else who has come before that, but he was not an official representative of Britain. In 1608, a person called William Hawkins landed in Surat in Gujarat, right? He was the first person of the East India Company, representative of the country of England to come. I will tell you about it a little later. So, see, in the previous chapter, we have studied about how the Marathas started becoming weak after Sambhaji, after Rajaram. They became progressively weak. There were 3 Anglo-Maratha wars that were fought. And by 1818, the Maratha Empire had completely been finished by the British. Now, understand what is the age of colonialism. See, we need to understand that many of these were small countries in Europe, but they were rich countries, right? And they were greedy to become even more rich by making colonies, by occupying territories in Asia and in Africa, and thereby getting rich by plundering the wealth of these countries, including India. That is what. So India was known at that time itself as a Sone ki chidiya, the golden bird. So they wanted to come here and loot and plunder and take advantage of this Sone ki chidiya. So colonialism, what exactly is colonialism? The definition you need to remember, where one country takes control of another region, establishing settlements there and imposing its political, economic and cultural systems. Please remember this definition of what exactly is colonialism. So you come and occupy, you impose your political system, you impose your economic system, you also impose your cultural system. You make people convert, you make people learn different languages, etc. So you try to make them in such a way that it helps your entire system. And colonialism is not something which happened only then in the 15th century. It can be traced back to the first millennium before Christ and also the first millennium Common Era, where the spread of Christianity and Islam involved occupying different kind of territories. Now, this is the second part of the map, timeline, which I definitely want each one of you to see and understand. What I referred to here, 1818, the Third Anglo-Maratha War. This is very important. 1757, which was 1 year before India's first war of independence in 1857. Okay, 1857 is here. Okay, so 1757 was when the Battle of Plassey was fought. Very important. We will speak about it in this particular video itself, right? So you need to know all these different dates. But when we speak about the age of colonialism, it usually refers to the efforts made by European countries from the 15th century onwards to kind of other parts of the world, mainly Asia and Africa. So which were the main countries? You had Spain, you had Portugal, you had Britain, you had France, you had Netherlands or Holland. You also had Denmark to an extent. So all these countries were trying to occupy different countries, territories, and make them their colonies. And the first one person to come to India was Vasco da Gama from Portugal. And that said, he was the first European to land on Indian shores. They also did military campaigns, that is, and this is something which is done by Vasco da Gama himself, right? And also enslavement of native populations. What is enslavement? That is, you turn someone into a slave and that person will be taken for life as bonded labor and will have to serve you and get nothing in return. Now, you would ask that, sir, why did these countries in Europe want to kind of create colonies? Because they realized that, when you are a small country, like many of those countries in Europe are smaller in size and definitely smaller in population compared to some states of ours like Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh, right? So there was this political competition between different countries there. England and France were not friends. Then France and Germany were not friends. Different countries were competing that, we should have more influence in the world, more global influence. So how do we do it? By increasing our territory. So then we can get the raw material from there and use it to become wealthy in our own countries. New trade routes, we can exploit their natural resources like iron, like coal, like petroleum, whatever, right? New markets where you can sell your goods. So from an economic point of view, it was considered very profitable. Also, this is the first one, which is the economic reason. Political reason is, of course, to become more powerful in the world. So that is the second reason. The third reason is to convert the local population to Christianity. You convert them so that the number of people who are Christians in the world becomes more. So Christianity becomes the number one religion in the world. That was another powerful motivation. So if you get a question about what made these countries in Europe undertake these campaigns to colonize different countries, these are the three reasons that you need to give. The fourth reason, which is less significant, was something called scientific inquiry. What exactly do you mean by that? The reason that you are curious to know about unknown lands, because when you are in a country like, let's say, Spain or Portugal, right, you wonder, where is India? We are hearing so much about India. How do we reach India? What is the route that we need to take to reach India? And which are the different parts of India? How do the people there look? What do they eat? What do they sell? What do they manufacture? What religion do they follow? So there is a lot of curiosity about an unknown land. Like Columbus, after Vasco da Gama, he also set forth for India, but he got lost, and in the process, he ended up discovering which country? America, right? So there is that scientific inquiry. So these four reasons you need to write in your answers. Clear? Okay. Now, see, I'm irrespective of the number of views I get on any videos, I'm very proud and very happy with the way I teach, because I teach in a way that will make you more curious and make you interested in what you're studying, instead of, no, that's not. I speak at a high pitch. I speak with a lot of energy, because then only when I am interested will you be interested in something like this, right? So while colonizers often claimed, now, so you basically realize that the people who are from European countries, they were doing it for their own selfish reason, right? But how do they justify themselves? How do they say that, oh no, we are also doing something good? So what they would say is that, oh, those countries' people are very uncivilized people. So we will go there and make them civilized people, right? So, and also bring them development to these colonized people who were often demonized. Demonized means they were kind of humiliated, insulted, looked down upon. You basically talk about people in a, like, English people will talk about Indians in a very negative light. They would build some clubs and say Indians and dogs are not allowed here. That's how they humiliated, insulted us in our own country. Just imagine, right? So basically they were demonizing, and they thought, we have introduced the train, right? So you see, we are bringing progress to you. No, they brought trains because they wanted to travel faster and in more comfort from one place to another place. They introduced telegraph and telephones. Why? Because they wanted to communicate with their own people. So the Englishmen did large things for their own benefit, but they marketed it by saying that, we are doing it for your benefit, right? So their reality was actually very different, because all the colonies lost independence. Their resources were exploited by the people who colonized them, and the traditional ways of life were destroyed, and the foreign cultural values were imposed on the people. You need to write all these 4 points if you get a question about what really changed for the people in these colonies, including in India. The first one, I repeat, is the loss of independence. The second one is all the resources were exploited. The third one is that the traditional way of life was destroyed. And the fourth one is that foreign cultural values were imposed on them. That is, you need to follow our cultural values. So while it is a fact that, because English came to India, Portuguese came to India, French came to India, the Dutch came to India, as a result of that, they all knew a lot about India. So India became well known in the entire world, right? But it and also gained from, that material was being sent to Europe from India, etc. But the benefits were largely for the countries which colonized these countries, including India, right? And put them into hardship. Imagine somebody coming into your house and imposing his rules on you, and you become servants. That was unfortunately the result of colonization. I hope this part is very clear. You should be able to explain to anyone out this, right? Now, you are this illustration that you see this entire country, and the way a cartoon depicting a British business magnate. Magnate means an industrialist and owner. He's kind of standing over the map of Africa while he holds a telegraph wire. The wire that he's holding in his hands, a telegraph wire, right? But basically, with the help of the telegraph wire, he's completely controlling the entire African continent. Okay. So you can discuss this in your class. Now, in many of these colonized regions, gradually people started resenting. Obviously, if you come here and you impose your rules on me, I'm not going to listen to it beyond a point, right? So, in the 20th century, like India became independent in the year 1947. So the mid 20th century, around the 1940s, 1950s, etc., many countries in Asia and Africa became independent and colonization went down. Okay, so now we are going to talk specifically about India because that's what we are dealing with. That's what even the book says, Exploring Society, India and Beyond. Oof. Now, Europeans in India, let's get started with it. Let me just see if there is anything. Yeah, this is about William Hawkins. Now, India traded with the Greeks and the Romans over 2 millennium ago. Okay, Indian goods. Which were the Indian goods which were popular? You had spices, cotton, ivory, gems, etc., among other commodities. They were sought after in the Gulf, etc. Until the 16th century, when European powers began sailing to the Indian subcontinent, India was already a vibrant economic and cultural powerhouse. India was well known, but Europeans had not. India used to trade many centuries ago, but largely Europeans in the modern context had not come to India then. They had not discovered India till 1498 when Vasco da Gama came. So historical estimates by an economist called Angus Madison, he suggested that India contributed at least 1/4 of the world GDP. Just imagine, actually, I think it's around 23 or 27%. It's mentioned in this book by Shashi Tharoor. Let me just quickly see. 23%. See, my memory is good. He says that when the East India Company took control of the country, that is of India, India's share of the world GDP was 23%. When the British left it in 1947, it was just above 3%. From 23%, they reduced it to 3 point something percent, right? You need to know all these facts. As class 8 students, you need to be aware. You can't just say, "Jo book mein hai, main wahi padhunga, uske beyond main kuch nahi padhunga." No, I want you to be, if you are a student of Sudhir sir, I will make you more aware of the world. It's not enough just to read the textbook and get the marks. No, you need to be more knowledgeable, because when tomorrow, after many years, when you go and do an MBA, when you go and study abroad, or when you go and do your post-graduation, there are things called group discussions which take place. There, your knowledge about various subjects is tested. They will give you a topic, and immediately within a minute, you need to start speaking there for the next 3 minutes. Can you do it? You can do it only if you read a lot, if your knowledge is beyond your NCERT textbook. So please remember that. Okay. What is GDP? GDP's full form is gross domestic product. Okay. Basically, GDP, to tell it to you very simply, because it's serious and complicated economics. So, but basically, it's a measure of the value of goods and services in a country. Basically, how much a country produces, how much revenue it generates. Or let's say if I'm in the service industry, let's say I have a hotel, right? And I'm providing service to whoever comes and stays in my hotel. So I'm generating some revenue. So whatever revenue, etc., is generated in a year, that is known as the gross domestic product, GDP, of a particular country. You have a national GDP. You also have different states have their SGDP, that is state gross domestic product, right? So for example, Gujarat will have its own GDP, state GDP, and the country will have, taking into account the GDP of all the states. Now, so at that time it was 23%. It says at least 1/4, 23% to be precise. And when it left India in 1947, our GDP was just above 3%, between 3 and 4%, right? So at that time, we were one of the largest economies in the world along with China. But because of the loot and plunder by England, we completely went down, right? So European travelers who came at that time into India described India as flourishing, means very wealthy, and noted that her manufacturing capabilities, that we were manufacturing different kinds of goods, diverse agricultural product from silk to spices to rubber, different kinds of products, and extensive internal and external trading networks. Because we used to use a sea route, the Cholas would do that. Many of the kings were doing that, use the sea trade route to trade with either the Mediterranean countries or the Far East countries, like, the Malaysia, Philippines kind of region, right? Because India was such a prosperous country, that's what attracted, like a magnet, all these European countries to come, and they ended up colonizing us. Clear? Now, let's understand who were the people who came first. The first to come, as I showed you, was Vasco da Gama and the Portuguese in the year 1498. So the Portuguese explorer and navigator Vasco da Gama's arrival at a place called Kapad. Okay, in fact, my father used to study in Kozhikode, so I remember him talking a lot about the exact place where Vasco da Gama landed. There is a plaque there whose photograph is there in the book, right? He used to study in Kozhikode. In May 1498, it paved the way for the beginning of the European colonization in India. Initially, he was well received, right? He was welcomed by the people, but he went back. He came back again after 4 years. At that time, he killed Indian merchants. He bombed Calicut from the sea. So he kind of did a lot of things which no normal good human being will actually do, right? He captured a lot of Indians, and the Portuguese gradually started becoming strong along the coast, and they gradually became very strong in Goa. Do you know something? That Goa became independent only in the year, many years after India became independent in 1947, right? Because the Portuguese had control over Goa, right? And Goa became the capital of their colony in India. In the Rani Appaka story, we have studied it in class 7, right? So it became the capital of their colony along the Malabar, the west coast of India, right? Should I just quickly go through this particular example before, or let me finish the Portuguese first and then I will go there. The Portuguese implemented a system which was known as cartas. Okay, now what exactly is this? This required all ships in the Arabian Sea. You know what is Arabian Sea, no? Like if this is the southern part, this is the Arabian Sea, right? Goa is somewhere here, Kerala is somewhere here. This is where Vasco da Gama landed, right? So this is the entire Arabian Sea. So they said that all ships in the Arabian Sea, they will have to purchase Portuguese permits for navigation. So if you need to move, you need to buy Portuguese permits. Okay, without that, we will not allow you to sail in the, get into the Arabian Sea. And whichever ship did not have these permits, they were seized by the Portuguese authorities, by people who had, the blessings of the Portuguese government. And because they were dominant in the sea, their navy was dominant, they completely controlled and monopolized the spice trade between India and Europe. That you could sell only to the Portuguese. You could not sell it to anyone else. That was like the control. Now, this is the place. Vasco da Gama landed here. Okay, Kap Kadavu. Kadavu is coast in Malayalam in the year 1498. So alongside commercial, let me quickly go through this thing so that we don't lose it. We will be studying about it in the English lesson. It's the last lesson we studied that in class 7. So a few centuries ago, the port town of Ullal, which is in modern day Karnataka, in the southern part of Karnataka on the coast, it was an important trading point controlled by Rani Appaka. In the later half of the 16th century, the Portuguese tried to control and they tried to defeat Rani Appaka. But Rani Appaka managed to fight against them and defeat them and drive the Portuguese out of Ullam, right? They were still controlling Goa. So she kind of fought against the Portuguese. They set many ships of the Portuguese navy on fire, and all these stories are part of the Yakshagana, which is like the traditional dance drama form, which comes from the beautiful state of Karnataka. So Rani Appaka story is what we will study we have studied in English in class 7. So now, alongside all these commercials, see, these were merchants on one side, but the merchants were also strong in the sense that they would use their dominant power of the navy, right? So that made them very dangerous. What the author and journalist William Bigby wrote right at the beginning, that they were interested in plundering and also controlling that entire area. So Portuguese were beginning to control the entire Arabian Sea region, and that made them very, very dangerous. So the Portuguese presence in Western India was characterized by religious persecution. So what does it mean? What they did was, in Goa, they established what was known as the Inquisition in the year 1560. Now, Inquisition is essentially a tribunal. Tribunal means it's a body which is set by the Roman Catholic. Okay, so what they did was, Christians suspected of holding opinions contrary to the church doctrine. So whoever was against the church, they would kind of file cases, they would punish them. And over some 600 years across Europe, many thousands of supposed heretics were tortured and executed. So anyone who would go against the Roman Catholic Church would be punished. Okay, so they also punished Hindus, they punished Jews, they punished Muslims, and any Christian convert suspected of practicing their original faith. So suppose there is a Hindu who has converted to Christianity, but silently on the sly, he's still practicing, he's still praying to Hindu gods, they would be punished by the Roman Catholic Church. This was known as Inquisition. This can be asked as a question, a 2-mark question. So please make a note of this. Okay. So such persecution means such targeting. They also made a lot of people convert. They destroyed a number of Hindu temples, and the Goa Inquisition was finally abolished in the year 1812, right? And that is because by that time, the English also had become very powerful, right? Because this was initially done by the Portuguese. Now, then we come to people from the Netherlands or Holland. Now, these people also came for commerce and for competition. See, the Dutch arrived in India in the early 17th century, but unlike the Portuguese, they focused only on commercial dominance, that we would want to do trade and we would want to be the number one in doing trade with India at that time, mainly in the business of spices. So what they did was to establish a Dutch East India Company, okay, a Dutch East India Company, and they established various trading posts on the west coast, like in Surat in Gujarat, Bharuch, Cochin in Kerala, and on the east coast, Nagapattinam, which is in present-day Tamil Nadu, and Masulipatnam, which is the old name for Machilipatnam, okay, which is in Andhra Pradesh. It's about 25-30 kilometers south of Vijayawada, right? Their most significant presence, I've spent a lot of time in Machilipatnam, because whenever cyclones would come, they would hit Machilipatnam. So I've spent a lot of time in Machilipatnam. There's a lighthouse there, there's a beach there, etc. Okay, basically a very fisherman kind of a place. Their most significant presence was in the Malabar region. Malabar region is the, if this is Kerala, the north region is known as the Malabar region. The central region is called the Central region, and the southern region is called as the Travancore region, because it was ruled by the Maharaja of Travancore. This is a spelling. Okay, Travancore, and this top region is called the Malabar region. Okay, where is Malabar? Here, Malabar region. And there the Dutch started displacing the Portuguese from trading centers, right? So they started taking over from the Portuguese. So you see, there was competition taking place between different European countries on exploiting the different trading routes as far as India was concerned. So here you see a depiction of the surrender of the Dutch forces to King Marthanda Varma of Travancore after the Battle of Kolachel. We will study about this. This is the Padmanabhapuram Palace in Thiruvananthapuram. Now, the Dutch presence in India was ultimately limited because they did not kind of try to occupy many territories. They were bothered only about the business activities, and they were defeated by the Travancore Maharaja and they at the Battle of Colonial in 1741. And after that, it was a rare instance of an Asian power defeating a European colonial force, right? So as a result of which, the Dutch influence went down in Kerala, in India, right? The next instance we are talking about is about the French presence. If England can come, England has not come. If Portugal can come, Dutch can come. Why would the French have? Why should the Portuguese have all the fun? That's what the French asked. So the French also entered India in the year 1668. This was also through Surat. So Surat, because it was a trading port in Gujarat, it became a very convenient because it's like this. If this is South India and this is Gujarat, Surat is somewhere here. So it became very convenient for people to enter. So you would either enter through Surat, Goa, or Kerala. So the French entered India later, and subsequently they came to Pondicherry. Pondicherry is on the east coast, right? They established their own East India Company and developed plans to establish a French empire in India. Now, the Governor General of French India was a person called Dupleix. Okay, and he pioneered several colonial strategies that would be adopted later by the British. Okay, so he trained Indian soldiers in European military techniques, created discipline in infantry soldiers known as sepoys. Dupleix also developed the strategy of indirect rule through puppet Indian rulers. That is, you would defeat an Indian ruler and then you would say, okay, you rule on my behalf, but the controls will be by the French, right? The French colonial ambitions were also checked in the Carnatic Wars. Now, it's very interesting. The Carnatic Wars were fought between who? The Carnatic Wars were fought between Britain and France. Carnatic, the name is because it is in the southern part of India, right? So between 1746 and 1763, a series of Carnatic Wars were fought between Britain and France to take control of the southern part of the country. And Dupleix, he had actually first captured Madras, which is the older name for Chennai. But later on, they lost ground to the British and they were restricted only to Pondicherry. Pondicherry, or Puducherry as it is known now, even today you find it was a French colony. So you would see a lot of French architecture being there in the Union Territory state of Pondicherry. So if you ever go to Puducherry, you would find a lot of French influence in the architecture of that area. Now, like the Dutch and unlike the Portuguese, the French colonial powers did not interfere too much in, they did not try to convert, they did not try to interfere in Indian social and religious life, right? The only exception, but they made one exception, that the Purishwaran temple in Pondicherry, that was destroyed by Dupleix in 1748 because the Christians in Pondicherry, they wanted it to be destroyed, and also Dupleix's own wife wanted to be destroyed because they wanted to show the dominance of Christianity. So this was one exception where they actually did something very destructive. Otherwise, they were happy to focus only on trading activities with India. Is this clear till here? Chali. Now, this is one of the drawings of Pondicherry kind of a thing, a plan of Pondicherry. Now come the British, who were the dominant and ended up ruling India for close to 200 years, right? So how did the British come, right? We will study about it in greater detail in class 9 and 10, but this is where we will make a beginning. So what happened was, let me show you something. This is not there in your textbook, but this is interesting information. The emperor that you see sitting on the throne is Emperor Jahangir, that is the son of Akbar, right? And the father of Shah Jahan. William Hawkins was the first Englishman to officially land in Surat in the year 1608. Okay. And the next year in 1609, he met Emperor Jahangir in Agra. And he carried a letter from King James I of England. He sought permission to trade in India, right? Because they came as traders essentially. So he told Jahangir, Emperor Jahangir, that I want to trade in India. However, what happened was, Jahangir gave him the title. Jahangir liked him. He treated him as a guest. He called him English Khan. But because the Portuguese were trading in a lot of places in India, so Jahangir said, I cannot give you full trading rights. He gave him only few trading rights. But subsequently, the English defeated the Portuguese in a battle near Surat in the year 1612, after which the English dominance and influence in India began to increase. The East India Company, as the British came to India as, right? So this is what happened, the fight between the Englishmen and the Portuguese in India, right? This was a battle which was fought near Surat. Interesting, no? Now, the British conquest of India is one of history's most remarkable examples of how a trading company could transform into an imperial power. You come as traders. The Britishers actually came as traders. If you read this book, an era of darkness is what Shashi Tharoor calls it, right? It was an era of darkness because from a country which had 1/4 of the world GDP, you reduced us to 3%. Oof. So they came as traders, but eventually ended up ruling over us, right? And it was a case, where they used a lot of devious methods, right? It was gradual. They were very, very cunning, very calculated. And they kind of, they said that we are interested in trading with you. But eventually they did what was called military invasion. The English East India Company was established as a trading company and was granted a royal charter by Queen Elizabeth I, right? And she gave it special powers. What were the special powers? To raise a private army, for instance, right? So she had given them special powers. However, the East India Company people like William Hawkins behaved like, no, we are only interested in doing business. Gee, we are not doing anything else. Only business we want to do, kind of thing, business, as wo Band Baja Bharat movie mein Ranveer Singh se business karenge, right? So they said we want to do only business and trade, right? So, but gradually Surat, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta, they started expanding themselves. And local rulers thought that, okay, they are doing trade. No, it is doing good. They are buying things from us, so it's good for us. So they also allowed them. They also encouraged them. And that became a big mistake because gradually the East India Company kept consolidating themselves, kept on strengthening themselves. Now, one of the things that they employed was the strategy of divide and rule. Please listen to this very carefully. Now, while they said we are traders, but they kept on developing different political relationships with the local rulers, people in the court of the local rulers, so that they could kind of play one against the other. And that's what really happened in Calcutta, in Bengal, right? So they kind of did this thing of divide and rule. So there would be one ruler, in the neighboring, there would be another ruler. They would kind of create differences between the two, and they would encourage them to fight against each other, right? Or they would create succession disputes. That is, if a king had 3-4 sons and he wanted to name one son as the next king, they would kind of go and tell the other son, why don't you try to become the king? And they would create differences. This was called the policy of divide and rule. Later on, they started doing it on the basis of religion, on the basis of caste, etc. But this was the first instance where they started doing this divide and rule policy. The British were also skilled at exploiting existing divisions within Indian society. They identified and encouraged tensions between religious communities, for instance, Hindu, Muslim mainly, right? Now comes the Battle of Plassey, which was fought in the year 1757. I told you to mark it. It is exactly 100 years before the mutiny of 1857, which is also known as the First War of Independence. You will study about that in class 10. Now, let me just show you something. Now, the Battle of Plassey, it saw the British playing dirty politics of divide and rule. Now, there was this person called Mir Jafar, who was the commander of the Nawab of Bengal, whose name was Sirajud-Dowlah. Okay. Now, what they did was the British wanted to defeat Sirajud-Dowlah, who was the Nawab of Bengal, right? Who was leading the East India Company? Then Robert Clive. Okay. So, Robert Clive, what he did very deviously, he kind of joined hands with this character called Mir Jafar, right? And he said, you betray the Nawab, you be a traitor, you side with us, but you behave as though you are with the Nawab, but you actually help us, right? And this was a classic example of divide and rule. So you see Robert Clive shaking hands with Mir Jafar in order to defeat the Nawab of Bengal, right? So he identified disgruntled means unhappy elements within the Nawab code, which was essentially Mir Jafar, who was Nawab's military commander. And he said, I will make you the next Nawab. If you help us, I will make you the Nawab of Bengal. So Mir Jafar, I will become the Nawab of Bengal. So he did that, right? And this battle took place in Battle of Plassey, as it is known, 1757. It is near Kolkata. And some French forces helped the Nawab of Bengal. But Mir Jafar, because he had betrayed the Nawab of Bengal, he kind of stood aside, means he didn't do anything, and the British won, even though they had smaller numbers. And even today, if anyone is talking about a traitor or someone who cheats you, you call him a Mir Jafar. You are a Mir Jafar kind of a thing. Even today's date, they call people like that Mir Jafar. So East India Company, that's how they started taking control and establishing their territory and control over large forces. So the Battle of Plassey that way is a major turning point. But they were not happy with that. They used to start establishing the governor generals. So one governor general was Lord Dalhousie. Okay, I'll tell you what Lord Dalhousie did. Now Lord Dalhousie, his mustache, the illustration has made him like me. So Lord Dalhousie, he introduced the Doctrine of Lapse. What exactly was the Doctrine of Lapse? It said that if a ruler of a princely state, right, like Jhansi, for example, if that person died without a natural male heir, not an adopted son, but someone who is his natural male heir, male, not female also, if that does not happen, the state, the kingdom would be taken over by the East India Company, right? If you are adopting a child, that would not be recognized by the British. And this was one of the reasons for the First War of Independence in 1857. And that made them very angry because it kind of disregarded, because Hindus did adopt children if they did not have their own children. And they they found this a very devious manner in order to take over the different Indian kingdoms. In the Indian context, a princely state was a region that remained under the rule of an Indian prince, Maharaja or Nawab, but which had accepted British protection and guidance in exchange for maintaining internal autonomy. That is, you're being ruled by an Indian ruler. Like, I don't know if you have seen the movie Lagan. There, the Raja, who is played by Kulbhushan Kharbanda, he is kind of there, but there is the British influence. The British have the army in that kingdom, right? So he has to do everything with the permission of the East India Company, right? So that's how. So he may be a prince, but control-wise, he is being controlled by the East India Company. And there are so many of them. Hyderabad, Mysore, Travancore, Jammu and Kashmir, many smaller ones. So at the time, in fact, at the time of India's independence in 1947, there were as many as 500 princely states in the entire country, right? Some of them were big, like Hyderabad, Junagadh, Kashmir were big. There are many smaller ones also. Now, so what happened as a result of the Doctrine of Lapse? The East India Company could start taking over many Indian kingdoms. And that led to the 1857 mutiny or rebellion. There was another strategy which was employed by the British, this time this was by another Governor General called Lord Wellesley. This was known as the Subsidiary Alliance. What did it mean? That Indian rulers had to accept British troops in their territory. That you have to kind of give space to the British army to come and be stationed in your place. It was known as the cantonment area. And their upkeep, the Indian prince had to pay for the maintenance of the British troops in that particular kingdom. They had to pay for the maintenance of these troops. In return, they got protection. That is, another European force will not attack you. If any other neighboring kingdom attacked you, the British forces army will fight against them. But the princely states lost control to the East India Company, as it is visible from this illustration, that it is the Britishers who started controlling the different princely kingdoms, right? So this was known, and they would also appoint someone called a British resident who would be stationed in that particular kingdom and indirectly control the affairs of that particular kingdom. So they would have to maintain British troops at their own expense, conduct foreign relations only through the British, and it effectively transferred real power to the British while burdening Indian rulers with the cost of their own subjugation. Subjugation means that, they were subjugated, means they were now inferior to the British. They had to listen to the laws or the orders of the British. The ruler of Hyderabad, the Nizam of Hyderabad, was among the first to accept the Subsidiary Alliance in the year 1798, and many others, etc., followed. And this allowed the East India Company or the British to control various vast territories and creating what was known as an empire on the cheap. That is, they did not have to fight direct battles, but gradually they had taken over vast territories. They allowed the Indian kings to rule, but the real control was with the British, because once the state entered the Subsidiary Alliance system, it was impossible for it to break free, because otherwise then the entire British military would come and attack you. So everyone gradually became their slaves. I hope it is clear till here. We pause here. In the next segment, we will start with From Paradise to Hell. From Paradise to Hell, we will start with that, where we will talk in more detail about what the British rule actually did to India. I hope till here, whatever I have taught is absolutely clear, and you have marked all the things which I have said are important. I'll now meet you in video number 2. We will do this entire chapter in 3 parts. Tata, bye-bye. Share the video and subscribe to CBSE with Sudhir. I will do chapter-wise test papers, but that will be a little later.